Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnet XXIX is part of a collection of sonnets titled Sonnets from the Portuguese. These 44 sonnets make up what is commonly called a sonnet sequence, in which each poem serves as one step in a narrative, emotional or psychological progression. Sonnet 29 follows to some extent the metrical pattern of the Petrarchan sonnet. The poem's iambic pentameter is mostly regular, except for moments when Barrett Browning toys with the meter to emphasize an idea. Let's see the summary of the sonnet. Barrett Browning's first statement is in part the subject of the poem, for the entire sonnet attempts to imitate, through its imagery and sound, the dynamics of her mind dwelling on Browning, her fond yet absent lover. Barrett Browning compares her thoughts of Browning to wild vines that twine and bud about a tree. Here the tree is Browning. Like vines, Barrett Browning's thoughts of Browning grow more profuse with the passing of time. Eventually, they grow to such length and density that they cover the tree that gives them a place to flourish. Soon there is naught to see, she explains, except for the straggling green of the vines in a metaphorical sense. Barrett Browning is suggesting that her thoughts eventually seem to overpower in intensity the thing that allows them to grow in the first place. Her longing for Browning seems to overshadow Browning himself, as eventually the straggling green on a tree hides the wood. Calling Browning my palm tree as a sign of playful affection, Barrett Browning insists that she could never regard her thoughts as a substitute for Browning himself. He is dearer, better than any thoughts about him, regardless of how beautifully expressed in verse those thoughts may be. Barrett Browning's thinking about Browning has increased her desire to see him, so she asks him to renew thy presence and face her. Extending the metaphor offered in lines 1 to 4, she commands Browning to act like a strong tree and rustle his boughs. Doing so will set thy trunk all bare and cause her thoughts of him to drop heavily down. The image of a tree shaking its own boughs in an effort to free itself of the vines that inspire it reflects Barrett Browning's opinion of Browning as a strong masculine figure who, when all bare, is beautiful in his simplicity and freedom from her encumbering thoughts. Indeed, Barrett Browning seems to hold little regard for her own thoughts, since she wishes these to be burst, shattered everywhere once Browning appears before her. Barrett Browning concludes the poem expressing the hope that she will soon be in the deep joy of Browning's presence and find herself under his shadow, as the shade of a tree provides comfort to those who sit under it. So will Browning's overpowering self provide comfort for Barrett Browning, who even describes the air under her palm tree as new. Her world is a better place when Browning is in it, and she is willing to remain overshadowed by the force and power of her beloved. Finally, she tells Browning that she is willing to sit in his shadow because doing so will free her from constantly thinking of him. She longs for the time when she will be too near him and where thoughts of him will be unnecessary. Barrett Browning's artistic challenge in Sonnet 29 is to depict the feelings that come upon her when she is separated from Browning. By extension, the poem applies to anyone who thinks about his or her absent beloved with longing and anticipation for his or her return. Barrett Browning's method is to describe the workings of her mind in organic terms. Thoughts are like wild vines that wind about the image of Browning, here likened to a tree. Barrett Browning's comparing her thoughts of Browning to vines that twine and bud about him suggests the degree to which his absence has affected her. Twine implies that her thoughts continually move in steady ways, while Bud suggests that they continually grow. One thought of Browning leads to a second, which leads to a third. Thoughts engender more thoughts, just as vines keep winding and budding with the progression of time. These vines also put out broad leaves, and the size of these leaves suggests the intensity of Barrett Browning's thoughts, an intensity so great that soon there is naught to see, except the straggling green which hides the wood. Vines can, of course, kill a tree by wrapping themselves around the branches and effectively cutting off the tree's means of survival. But Barrett Browning does not want to commit botanical suffocation. Instead, Barrett Browning wishes that she could see Browning in the flesh rather than in her mind's eye. Just as straggling vines are no match for the power and beauty of a strong tree, thoughts of a person are a weak substitute for the person himself. Barrett Browning states, "I will not have my thoughts instead of thee for this very reason." Her recognizing that her thoughts of Browning cannot compensate for his absence prompts Barrett Browning to beg him, "Renew thy presence." To continue the botanical metaphor, Browning's return will be like a tree shaking off the vines that cover it. "Rustle thy boughs and set thy trunk all bare," she asks, wishing to see him in all the glory of his strength. As the poem continues, Barrett Browning's wish to see Browning grows more powerful to the point where she denies the value of her own longing. She hopes that the bands of greenery which inspire him will drop heavily down and lie bust shattered everywhere. The reader gets the sense of Barrett Browning's growing impatience with her own thoughts and their feeble attempts to inspire the essence of Browning. Once her strong tree has returned to her, she can peacefully dwell in his shadow and breathe a new air, an air made dearer and better by Browning's presence. Then she will not need to think of him because she will be too near him. The physical presence of the beloved precludes any longing thoughts of him because this presence is too overpowering.